Srimati Nirja, who gave the welcome address, Shri Venkatakrishna CGM, who's hosting this meeting, Shri SMN Swami, Regional Director RBI, Shri Shantilal Jain, who just addressed us, Shri Ajay Kumar Srivastava of Indian Overseas Bank, the convener of the SLBC, and fellow colleagues from the government, bankers, friends. Thank you for coming to this very important event today, and thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak. I want to start with something that I've said before at the SLBC, but I think it's worth repeating here. In any society, the flow of credit is a crucial either enabler or lack of is a barrier to growth. If you look at advanced economies like the US or Europe, OECD countries, the credit markets, including government debt, will be much larger than the equity markets. There is a natural buyer of credit, the whole kind of underpinnings of finance, which is about moving money back and forth in time for pensions, for retirement, for life insurance, requires very stable and very deep credit markets. If you look at both stock, as I say, it's much higher, and if you look at flow, then I mentioned at the SLBC that when in my stand chart days, the rule of thumb we used was whatever the GDP growth we expected in a country, we try to double that percentage for the credit growth we should allocate. That's how important credit is in emerging markets. It's particularly true in banks because in most advanced countries, the market mechanisms have evolved to the point where markets supply a lot of the credit. I was once a commercial paper trader back in New York in the turn of the century. On any given day, about $1.5 to $2 trillion would change hands in the money markets, in the commercial paper markets, at an average maturity of something like 7 days. So even that segment of the liquidity was already in the market. Whereas if you take places like India, our bond markets are so underdeveloped and our infrastructure for bad debt resolution or adjudication is so weak that banks play an enormous role, 80-90% of the overall credit market. And then if you start going down the spectrum to the MSME, to the individual borrowers, banks are pretty much the only available source there is. Beyond that, you have to go to usurious kind of street lending at extremely egregious rates of interest. So in that sense, this kind of group is crucial to the plans of any state, any part of the country as it contemplates its future and starts planning for growth and upliftment of people's lives. What I mentioned at the SLBC also is that it's very easy for bankers, particularly commercial bankers, to do the same number of hours of work, of diligence, of restructuring, of assessment on large loans as on small loans. So it's a natural bottleneck for all human beings. There's only so many hours in a day, only so much attention an individual can dedicate. And so the tendency is to do lots of large ticket loans to the mega corporates, and even restructuring or kind of giving a bit of slack is easier for those loans. But unfortunately, those end up becoming both politicized in a lot of cases or pressurized, and very easily become bad loans. And that happened in commercial banks like my previous bank. So the need for the hour in our society is for banks to do a lot of granular, micro-focused lending to individuals, to farmers, to small business owners, to micro business owners, and to do it with the mechanisms of the state. Sometimes the states have cooperative societies and banks that have such a wide spread that no bank can emulate that reach. And for that, we need a lot of data, we need a lot of cooperation, we need a lot of execution at the grassroots level. Our economic advisor, the former Reserve Bank Governor, Dr. Rajan, is in town, and we've been having a series of meetings, including with some of the managers here. And one of the points I made to him in the course of our discussions was that when I was in New York at Lehman Brothers, the Federal Reserve put out so much information in collecting data in real time, daily, weekly, monthly, from every single bank. So what the state of play was transparent to all of us. We could literally map what was happening in the country. Even in the markets, they insisted on getting reports from the commercial paper markets. So even the average rate of interest for the 1-day paper, the 3-day paper, the 5-day paper, where the trades closed, was reported electronically, averaged, aggregated, and put out. When I came to India first as a banker, I just felt the shortfall of information. We were all operating a bit in the dark. There was no that level of detail connected. I've since left the banking industry, so I'm not so sure what the situation is today. But in the absence of such data, reports like this report had enormous value, on the assumption that they were accumulated from the grassroots up every year from the districts and put together, then they are of tremendous value. I was also very impressed to see for the first time the wide range of ancillary or facilitation services that NABARD provides, from training, skilling, marketing, venture capital, incubation, and so forth. So I think in some sense, the success of NABARD is the success of India, is the success of our rural economy. And, over the years, the infrastructure they have put up and the systems they have built are very impressive. I had the chance to interact with the Chairman, Managing Director Chintala, my friend, a couple of times. We have a good relationship. He has been very kind in allocations to Tamil Nadu, attention to Tamil Nadu. But I want to point out maybe 2 or 3 things for the CGM. In the presentation, I saw that between 1920 and 2021, there was almost 100% increase in the total book. Between 2021 and 21-22, there was only 50%. And that next year, you only targeted about a 25% increase in the book. So I would urge you to reconsider and see if you can allocate a bit more, considering what percentage of the economy Tamil Nadu is and where we're growing, and what part of the cycle we're in, which is recovery from a pandemic, where the MSME sector has been very seriously impacted. On my part, I have a couple of things positive from the government side to say. Yesterday I met with the MD of IOB and the convener, the general manager, and I requested that from now on, no SLBC meeting should be convened without my presence for the next whatever term of this government. I will participate personally in every meeting and try to both facilitate the bankers' requests, but also provide better connectivity with all departments of the government to improve the execution on the ground. We also have taken an approach under the able guidance of our Chief Minister. I've announced it during the budget, and we continue to do that every day, which is a data-centric governance. We want to understand what is happening, and we want to cross-reference our data sets. As I said before, I don't like operating in the dark, at least in the shade even. So our efforts have already yielded a lot of very good outcomes for us. We have a project called the Data Purity Project in the Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency. The cross-referencing of data showed us a lot of problems in the way that loans were extended in various cooperative societies. We have a target, the RCS is here today, we have a target of 100% computerization down to the lowest level of societies within the year. We will integrate all those into the platform. We will cross-reference all the data, and we will try and reduce the malfeasance, reduce the leakages and waste. On the NABARD side, I'm very impressed with this data, but forgive me for maybe making two suggestions. When you have organizations that do this every year, the good news is that there's a lot of connectivity, there's a lot of, what can I say, depth, understanding, and the level of sophistication that's hard to recreate in a new organization. The bad news is that a lot of times this gets just done by inertia. You take last year's numbers and you do plus minus some percent on that, and you just put out the numbers. We see that in government, we see that in the budget. So we have announced, for example, that in the budget, every year some percentage of the departments will be given a zero base and will have to start from zero instead of just last year plus or minus. And that some budgets, some departments will be given top-down targets and say, this is your total allocation. You decide how you split between capital expenditures, wages, projects, support, etc. So sometimes it's good to shake up these systems. I would urge you to go and look back at your last few years' reports and see if there's any patterns where it just looks like plus minus rather than from scratch collection of data and putting it out. I'll just say two things to conclude. One, as the RBI regional director pointed out, though we have these targets, some parts of these targets are met or exceeded, but the overall credit targets are not quite met. Well, the easy explanation is the pandemic and the disruption of normal activity, but that just tells you it exacerbates the need for credit, because the recovery from the pandemic is going to require a lot more focus, a lot more attention, a lot more access to liquidity. For example, in the SLBC meeting that I attended the first time, I noticed that the schemes announced by the union government or by the Reserve Bank at its headquarters, by the admission of the branch managers and other members of the SLBC itself, had not percolated all the way down to the branches. And if they themselves didn't understand it, surely they were not using, they were not conveying it to the MSME owners. So we decided on a joint strategy where the RBI would give some additional training, where the government would spend some money and try and facilitate this, where we would try and jointly kind of increase the exposure and understanding of what these programs are. We are happy to do those things all the time. So, wherever the government can help through different departments, the agriculture department, the MSME department, we're happy to do that. We remain focused on outcomes. Slogans are good, but outcomes really improve people's lives. Slogans remain slogans. We will take on board the 4 points the host has put out on soil and water processing, on post-harvest, soil and water focus, post-harvest processing, strengthening FPOs, and moving more towards the animal husbandry and fisheries places where the value-added agriculture happens. All these we will take as focus areas for the government. We have announced yesterday that the governor's address, the speakers announced, will come on the 5th of January. The budget will have to come in short order after that. So as we set our priorities for 22-23, we'll certainly take on board the suggestions and inputs from NABARD and from the SLBC. And I think, working closely together, the government and the banking system can make a significant difference at the granular level, at the grassroots level. And that's where the bulk of employment in our country happens, and that's where the bulk of alleviation of, limitations to the quality of life happens. So with that, let me thank you for inviting me again. It's been very informative, educational. I'm happy to know that this level of data exists, that this level of activity happens every year. Much as I've seen with the rest of government, the design is good, starting with the Constitution till today. We have wonderfully designed systems. A lot is, left to be desired in the execution. So let's try and fix that gap between the design and the execution, and measure our success only by outcomes. And hopefully we'll have something better to talk about, or more impressive to talk about a year from now. Thank you very much.